Good evening. I need a gavel, I think. Good evening. I'm Dr. Brian Clayton, Director of Gonzaga University's Faith and Reason Institute. On behalf of the Institute's Executive Board, I welcome you to this evening's lecture, the second of two inspired by Father Robert Spitzer's book, New Proofs for the Existence of God. Before we get started this evening, just a couple of housekeeping things. One is everyone able to see the screen okay, or do we need to dim the lights at all? It's okay? Okay, good. And then the second, I've been asked to announce that if anyone wants copies, to purchase a copy of the DVDs of this, to contact Margaret, and we'll get information to you about that. And those would be $5. $5 for the DVD. Well, these lectures are the inaugural events of the Faith and Reason Institute's new Catholic Intellectual Tradition Project. I hope that those who were present for last evening's lecture will pardon me for repeating what I said on that occasion about the nature and mission of this project. The history of the Roman Catholic Church is also the history of a great intellectual tradition, a tradition of philosophical, scientific, and literary inquiry and exploration. It is an intellectual tradition that has long promoted the integration of faith and reason, and it is a living tradition that needs to be recognized and continued. The Institute intends to offer occasional lectures and programs that celebrate and contribute to the life of the Catholic intellectual tradition. Again, as I said last night, the work of our speaker this evening is part of this tradition and extends the tradition in ways that are important for us as a Catholic university and as a people living amidst the civilization that the Catholic Church has helped to build and shape. It is especially fitting that Father Spitzer be the speaker at these inaugural events, for during his time as president of Gonzaga University, he was also the co-director of the Gonzaga University Faith and Reason Institute. It is largely through his vision, energy, and support that the Institute was able to grow during his tenure as Gonzaga's president, and that thanks to the ongoing generosity of its donors and friends, the Institute continues its work today. Father Spitzer's new responsibilities since leaving the presidency of the university have taken him to Southern California, where, among other things, he is the co-founder and current president of the Magis Center of Reason and Faith, headquartered in Irvine, California, where it is significantly warmer, I'm sure, and more pleasant than it is here right now. He also is the president of the Spitzer Center on Catholic Organizations and the Chief Educational Officer for EPI, the Ethics and Performance Institute. His life continues to be characterized by apparently boundless energy and a contagious enthusiasm for the life of the mind and the life of faith. As many of you know, Father Spitzer received his undergraduate degree from Gonzaga University in 1974. He went on to earn multiple graduate degrees in philosophy and theology from such prestigious institutions as St. Louis University, through Gregorian University in Rome, the Weston School of Theology in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and the Catholic University of America. His dissertation at Catholic University was completed in 1988 and entitled A Study of Objectively Real Time. He has held academic appointments at Georgetown University, Seattle University, and Gonzaga University. In addition to numerous articles in scholarly and popular journals, he has also published 5 books and is currently at work on 3 more. Last fall, Airbans published his 4th book, New Proofs for the Existence of God, the basis for this week's lectures. In last evening's lecture, Father Spitzer summarized the evidence and arguments for a beginning of the physical universe. Father Spitzer combined this datum with the metaphysical principle that from nothing only nothing comes, as he had us say nothing a number of times, and thereby reached the conclusion that, as he puts it in his book, it is reasonably likely that the universe came from something which is not physical reality. This something that thus transcends physical reality and is, as the transcendent cause of the universe, the creator of the universe. The question quite naturally arises, is there anything more that contemporary physics can tell us about this transcendent cause? Thus, tonight, Father Spitzer will examine the so-called anthropic coincidences in a talk he has entitled, A Tale of Two Metaphysics. Please join me in welcoming Father Robert Spitzer of the Society of Jesus. Thank you, Father.
Just three quick thoughts before I begin. This website, again, if these facts are important to you, or you know someone that this information might be helpful for, please go to magisreasonfaith.org, all one word there, and it's free. There are lots of video casts with fine graphics. Here are these are the fact sheets that we have there that summarize a lot of the information I've been going through last night and we'll be going through tonight. It's all free. You can just print it out. There are downloadable podcasts. There's a Facebook where you can get your questions answered either by me or Dr. Bob Kurland, the physicist, who also writes with us, and other folks. So it's a great resource if you know someone and you're not quite sure, how you might want to respond to a question they ask. Maybe that's a place you could send them. Just want to start with a review of where we've come, just very basically and briefly. And so we'll just go to that triangle sheet here. And last evening we went across the top of that triangle and we looked at the evidence for a beginning. There we saw two major data sets, one from Entropy, the progressive and seemingly irreversible move from complex organized states to disorganized and random states, which should make the universe, as it were, run out of usable energy if it has a finite amount of energy over an infinite amount of time, which does seem to suggest that time is not infinite, because entropy in the universe right now is quite low, instead of at its optimum, instead of at its maximum. Secondly, we looked at briefly at three space-time geometry proofs. The 1993 Borda-Vilenkin proof, the 1999 comprehensive modeling of Alan Guth, and then the 2003 proof from Borda-Vilenkin and Guth, called the BVG theorem, which had but one condition, and that one condition was an average Hubble expansion greater than 0. It could be applied to a multiverse with any kind of physics, could be applied to a universe with any kind of physics. It can even be applied to an oscillating universe, so long as the oscillating universe had an initial expanding cycle, and that would give it an average Hubble expansion greater than 0. And so we saw that these two diverse data sets converge together and point to a beginning of the universe. And indeed, even if there was a beginning prior to the Big Bang, say a multiverse, or a string multiverse, or a higher dimensional space string oscillating universe, like the Steinhart-Turok theory, it would still require a beginning. And finally, we saw the ramifications of that beginning in physics, namely that beginning marks a point at which the universe, or any multiverse in which it might be contained, or any oscillating universe, would have had to have come into existence. A point prior to which it would have been nothing. A point, as Dr. Clayton just pointed out, does seem to require a creator outside of the universe, if from nothing, only nothing can come. Now today we get to the third part of the triangle. We now take a look at not only the evidence for a beginning, but something which is a very different data set. But this particular data set is looking at what is called fine-tuning of the parameters, conditions, and constants of the universe. Let me just begin with a really brief explanation of fine-tuning and then give an example, one that we heard a little bit briefly last night, and then get into the whole idea of universal constant and take a look at that. What I'm going to suggest is right now that the constants, conditions, and parameters, the fine-tuning, of the constants, conditions, and parameters that I'll be talking about tonight, these are pretty much universally acknowledged. If you go to chapter 6 of Stephen Hawking's book, The Grand Design, he acknowledges that these anthropic coincidences are there, and further acknowledges that they cannot be explained by pure chance. It's just not possible. It's in the order of magnitude of improbability that is so grand and so excessive, for all intents and purposes, it's just not physically realistic to think at all that they occurred by pure chance. Leonard Mlodinow believes this. So wait a minute, if these coincidences, if these highly improbable fine-tuning fine-tuned parameters and conditions and constants can't be explained by pure chance, and they're all very necessary for life, as we'll talk about, even to get a life form in the universe. Forget maintaining a life form. Forget the evolution of a life form. That's way down the pike. Just to get to a life form of any kind. It doesn't even have to be from our periodic table, but any kind of a periodic table which might have evolved. If that's the case, and Stephen Hawking and Leonard Mlodinow would admit that these things cannot be explained by pure chance, it's just so out of the range of pure chance and randomness, then we have to ask ourselves, how do they explain it? And what we will see is they explain it by means of a multiverse. A multiverse that I talked about last night, a bubble universe. We're going to be talking about two theories, the Linde's chaotic inflationary multiverse and Leonard Susskind's string theory landscape. We'll talk about it a little bit. But these multiverses that arise out of a combination of string theory and inflationary theory do permit for all kinds of bubble universes to come about. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later. But each one of them gets a new set of constants. So they start off with, an arbitrary set, so it's like rolling the dice again and again and again and again. And the more bubble universes you get, the more possibility there might be that these huge numbers, this huge improbability that can't be explained by pure chance on a single try, well, gosh, if you had trillions upon trillions upon trillions upon trillions upon trillions of bubble universes, maybe on one of those bubble universes, on one of those throws of the dice, maybe we could have hit upon the parameters necessary for life. These multiverses, as we'll see in a moment, they're not visitable. It's not permitted. We won't get any evidence directly of them, but we can know the possibility of them if string theory is verified. And right now it is not. But if it is, it might be possible. And if it is possible, then of course there's always the hope that there could be a quasi-naturalistic explanation of how we just happened upon our constants so necessary for life. A tale of two metaphysics, though. Because at the end of the day, the two explanations that you're going to have for these highly improbable anthropic coincidences taking place, since they can't take place by pure chance, is either going to be an intelligent designer, Fred Hoyle's super-calculating super-intellect, on the one hand, or the multiverse theory on the other. But it will require a lot of bubble universes in that multiverse. And then we will see there is the problem of meta-level fine-tuning of the multiverses itself. And that we will go into in a moment. Why call it two metaphysics? Can't visit the other universes. That's the problem. It's not really within the scope, but we could call it a naturalistic or a quasi-naturalistic explanation, because those multiverses must in some sense be linked with ours in the so-called, those other universes must be linked with ours in some sense in the multiverse itself. So that's where the title comes from. Let's get down to maybe a first example of fine-tuning. Fine-tuning, then, just think of it this way. It's a highly, highly, highly improbable coincidence, a highly, highly improbable condition, a highly, highly improbable value of a constant, which we will say, for the sake of anthropic arguments, is necessary for an anthropic universe. What's an anthropic universe? It's a universe, yes, that can sustain intelligent life, but really it has to be a universe which can sustain any life form at all. So we're going to use the most basic form of this argument. We're going to be talking about then, can we get a universe? What are the possibilities or the probabilities for getting to a universe that can sustain any life at all? The fine-tuning of the parameters and constants of the universe in order to produce one that will sustain a life form is exceedingly remote. And that's precisely what even Stephen Hawking would say cannot be logically explained by pure chance. So, let's maybe begin with an example that we heard about last night when we were talking about entropy. Recall for just a moment that entropy is that irreversible process, and we're going to be looking at it from a statistical, mathematical viewpoint. It's an irreversible process moving from complex organized systems of energy to disorganized and random systems of energy. The key thing that you need to see is that you really do need low entropy. Low entropy means you still have usable energy, right? You still have some complex, organized, energetic systems that can actually do something. They have usable energy, if I can use that in scare quotes. They're not completely run down. So the key thing is we're moving then from complex and organized to random and disorganized. Random and disorganized can't do anything. Random and disorganized, a super high entropy would not allow a life form to develop. You are going to need complex, organized, energetic systems to sustain and develop life forms. If the universe is basically cosmic microwave background radiation, that's all she wrote. There's not going to be a whole lot going on in this universe. Now, there was this guy, Roger Penrose, who we heard about very briefly last night, a physicist, who actually calculated, and it's rather easy, elegant calculation, calculated what the odds are of the entropy being low, especially the low entropy of our universe at the Big Bang, at its initiation. In essence, you just take the number of baryons in the universe, which is 10 to the 80, times the entropy per baryon, which is 10 to the 42, or 10 to the 43. You just add the exponents together, right? And it's about 10 to the 123. Then, of course, if you want to know the phase space possibility for that level of entropy for at the beginning of the universe, you just take the exponential of it, and what you get is this. 10 raised to the 10 raised to the 123 to 1. That's the odds against the low entropy of our universe at the Big Bang. In other words, the odds clearly favor high entropy universes. The odds clearly favor a universe that is used up or nearing the point of being used up. The fine-tuning that is required to have lots and lots of complex organized systems, that fine-tuning is very improbable. Let's go back to the example we gave yesterday. It's like the pool balls, right? You have the complex organized system, all racked up in a nice triangle. You hit the cue ball, it scatters, makes it more disorganized, more random. You're okay with it. It's probable that it would happen that way. You'd say it was very improbable if you hit the cue ball right into the randomly scattered balls and somehow it came back to the triangle again and spit the cue ball out at the end. Simple mathematical, simple statistical residues will show that this process of disorganization, of randomness, will continue inexorably. Now here is the point. 10 to the 10 to the 123 to 1 for a low entropy universe like our own. No one believes that this happened by pure chance on one try. Just like no one believes that a monkey randomly typed the entire corpus of Shakespeare flawlessly by random tapping of the keys in one try. No one believes this because it is virtually mathematically impossible. So how do you explain it? Well, you might think there's a natural cause for low entropy at the beginning of the universe. But people have been searching for this natural cause for a long, long time. Ever since Roger Penrose wrote that book, The Emperor's New Mind, in 1989, lots of people have been looking and looking and looking for some natural cause which would explain a low entropy condition in the boundary conditions of the universe at the Big Bang. Unfortunately, there is no natural cause known, and it looks exceedingly difficult to find one in a big, huge explosion. Rather, it looks like the low entropy condition was prescribed at the very Big Bang itself and just happened. In other words, the monkey typed the Shakespeare flawlessly, as it were, at the Big Bang. Now we get to our possibilities, which I'm just going to save to the end. Everyone is in agreement, absent a natural cause, for this low entropy at the beginning of the universe, and it doesn't look like there really is one, then either there has to be a multiverse explanation, or frankly, as Penrose himself said in 1989, the Creator picked the conditions and parameters required in order for that to occur. Take your pick. Pure chance, not an option. Let's go to a series of other kinds of things, though, so you can just see some of the work that has been done with constants. There are about 36 arguments on these, what I'm going to call constants. I'm not going to have your eyes glaze over. I'm going to give you 5 of them. The key thing, of course, to remember are the following 3 things. First, what's a constant? A constant is a number. What kind of a number? A number that literally controls the equations of physics. The equations of physics describe the laws of the universe. You with me? These numbers, therefore, are controlling the laws of the universe. What kind of numbers are there? We think there are 17 basic constants, and then there's a bunch of derivative ones. The speed of light constant, 186,200 miles per second or 300,000 miles per second. And remember last night we were talking about the fact that with energetic systems and light systems, you couldn't speed up the light, you couldn't slow down the light. It always had the invariant velocity of 300,000 kilometers per second. And the only thing you could do if you launched it from a fast-moving source is you could increase the frequency or decrease the frequency of the light, but you couldn't increase or decrease the speed of the light. And this is a really important constant. It's controlling an awful lot of equations and laws of nature out there, and it's really, really lucky that it's 300,000 kilometers per second. You don't want it to be too variant. Be very bad. Very bad. But we'll talk about that second. Second, many of you have heard of Planck's constant. Some of you have we have 4 forces in the universe we talked about last night, remember? All of them have constants attached to it. So with the electromagnetic force, we have 3 constants. The electromagnetic charge, right, of a proton or electron, the opposite, but their charge, the mass of a proton and the mass of an electron, okay? Those are constants. They control the laws of nature. What's called the strong nuclear force coupling constant, or just the strong force constant. It controls how the 2 protons are bonded together. So it controls not just the equations, controls the laws that the equations describe. The weak force constant as well, and the gravitational constant as well. Many of you heard Hubble's constant last night, and of course a cosmological constant and a variety of other constants. The key thing is these 17 fundamental or basic or irreducible constants, they're controlling all of the laws of nature. Second, do you sort of get it? More or less? Second thing, those numbers could have been anything at the Big Bang. There is absolutely no necessity that that the invariant speed of electromagnetic and luminescent systems be 300,000 kilometers per second. I'm a really happy coincidence that it is, but it doesn't have to be. The gravitational constant doesn't have to be what it is. The weak force constant, it could have been just about any number higher or lower than they currently are. But the key thing, the third thing is, these constants must have a very, very, very precise value. Extremely narrow window of possible values in order for life forms to develop in the universe. 3 steps then. Number 1, constant is controlling the laws of nature. Number 2, it could have been anything at the Big Bang. Number 3, it has to fall within a very narrow range in order for the universe to allow a life form to develop and to maintain it. Now, notice that this is not really what might be called a biological intelligent design argument. We're pre-biology here. We're talking about a universe which can actually maintain what I'm going to call laws of chemistry and biology. See what I'm saying? So we're not talking about evolution. We haven't even gotten there. The first step we need before we can get to any kind of biological system or scheme of recurrence is you need a universe that can support a biological system or scheme of recurrence. That's the big problem. That's the chain, a weak link in the chain. So let's talk about just 5 of them. I don't want you falling asleep, hitting your head on the desk. The first one, if the gravitational constant or the weak force constant relative to what's called lambda Baer, don't worry about it. If the gravitational constant and the weak force constant had been off by 1 part in 10 to the 50, this is a very small fraction. That's a decimal point, 49 zeros, and a 1. Had been off 1 part in 10 to the 50, higher or lower in either constant. the universe would have either exploded continuously in its expansion. This would have been very bad for life forms, very bad for all biological systems and schemes of recurrence. Alternatively, the universe would have collapsed into a Schwarzschild black hole, where the entire mass of the universe is condensed into 10 to the minus 33 centimeters. This is also very bad for life forms. The point, of course, is either of those two universal conditions, a catastrophic collapse followed by a Schwarzschild black hole, or alternatively, continuous explosion of the universe, could not sustain an anthropic universe. Remember, it's just a shift of 1 part in 10 to the 50. By the way, all the quotes are in the book here. So if you want these quotes and you want the actual articles and things of that nature, just go to chapter 2 of this book. Also, if you want them, the fact sheets here have a brief summary. You can get them right off the website. Second one, just to illustrate, the strong force coupling constant. If it had been just 2% greater than its value, we would have no hydrogen. And this is very bad for life forms because we need nuclear fuel and water in order to have them. Alternatively, if it had been just 2% lower than it currently is, we'd have no element heavier than hydrogen. This too would have been bad for life forms because you need more than hydrogen. You need carbon and so forth. At least you need a complex periodic table. What's the point? Wow, we must be really, really lucky. We lucked out on the gravitational constant. We lucked out on the weak force constant. We're lucking out on the strong force constant. Okay, we're really, really, really lucky. Okay. Now, of course, just another example. Every one of our stars is literally at the point of convective instability. That means we fall within this exceedingly narrow range of either being a blue giant or a red dwarf. A blue giant is an exploding star. Oh yes, it's ending its life, and it's exploding, but it's frying everything in sight. It's not good for life forms. Alternatively, you have a red dwarf, but a red dwarf's at that infrared end of the spectrum. It doesn't even have enough light, as I said last night, to give a Hawaiian a tan. It's not going to sustain a life form. Now, this is absolutely fascinating. If the electromagnetic charge, the gravitational force constant, or the mass of the electron compared to the mass of the proton were off by 1 part in 10 to the 39, it's a small fraction, a 0.38 zeros and a 1. 1 part in 10 to the 39. Every higher or lower, every single star in our universe would either be a blue giant or a red dwarf. Unsustainable in terms of a life form. As I said, the list goes on and on. You can read this, but I want to stop at one that really got to Fred Hoyle. As you know, Fred Hoyle was very much an advocate of atheism for many years, and perhaps was the most pronounced atheist physicist, for sure, for decades and decades. And one day, his partner, at least so the story goes, Fowler, comes up to him and goes, Fred, we have a problem. Fred goes, what's that? Well, you know, the resonance levels of atoms, they allow an atom to be sticky or not sticky, to hold together or to fly apart. And these resonance levels, they have to have specific frequencies in order to do the sticking. So basically you need, you know, a lot of stickiness to get an abundance and stickiness of carbon so that carbon can actually be the source atom for life. So, William Fowler comes up to Fred Hoyle and he says, oh, okay, Fred, we've got a problem here. We have to have the resonance levels of beryllium, oxygen, helium, and carbon fall within this exceedingly small range of frequencies in order to get the bonding required to have a carbon atom. Hoyle was stunned. He went back to his office for 3 days. So the story goes. And he came out and he basically made this quote. I consider, and you can look at it, I consider that there are no blind forces worth speaking about. It's basically what he said. And he came on and he said, the odds of a carbon atom developing by pure chance are so remote that one must believe that some super-calculating super-intellect has monkeyed with the constants of physics to have them dovetail felicitously so that they would give rise to carbon. I consider this conclusion to be beyond doubt, something of that nature. Then he went on to say, the odds of getting a carbon atom by pure chance, or an abundance of carbon atoms in our universe by pure chance, is like a tornado sweeping through a junkyard, assembling a Boeing 747 ready for flight. For all intents and purposes, Hoyle came to be a believer and a defender of rational theism. But that was 1989, and now we have a tale of two metaphysics, because quite frankly, I could keep going and going and going with these constants. The point is simply this. The odds are just simply too great. What we are talking about are virtual impossibilities. 10 raised to the 10 raised to the 123 to 1. And these things are compounded by values of constants that can't even vary 1 part in 10 to the 50, 1 part in 10 to the 39, 2% higher, 2% lower. But they're compounded upon compounded upon compounded, because now you're talking about all these things have to be exactly right with all the constants in order to have just a universe that will sustain a life form. Now, if that is the case, if it truly is virtually impossible to explain this by a pure chance mechanism, then I think we are at the point of seeking some other kind of explanation. We are going to have to go, in some sense, since these constants could have been anything at the Big Bang, quite literally, we have to seek an explanation which will at least satisfy the requirements to move beyond pure chance, which makes no sense at all. As I said before, there are two great candidates to do the explaining. The first was the multiverse theory. There are two basic multiverse theories. One is a quantum multiverse, and the other is the so-called string multiverse. The Everett-DeWitt quantum multiverse is probably the only one that remains around today as a possibility. It has been criticized quite regularly by various people, but essentially there are three huge problems with the quantum universe. First of all the current models that have been constructed, and even the ones that have, where people have tried to improve upon Everett-DeWitt to get out of the previous problems, have so many problems connected with them that most theorists have gone over to the string multiverse rather than keep with the quantum multiverse. It's just simply too problematic. But there are other problems with it too. You can't visit the other universes in principle. It's not permitted. Third, as Davy says, it brings excess baggage to a cosmic extreme, violating Occam's razor. The most elegant, simplest explanation that has the least number of assumptions is to be preferred. That generally is the case in science. We generally abide by what is called the canon of parsimony. That is to say, Occam's razor. The less assumptions, the less excess baggage, the better. And unfortunately, the quantum multiverse brings that to cosmic extremes, lots of excess baggage. There is another problem with it, and that is that I have to be multiplied in all of those universes. And I just have this sneaking suspicion that there are not trillions upon trillions of Spitzers in alternate universes with trillions upon trillions of you. Somehow, it just doesn't seem to fit. All this to explain the constants? That's metaphysics, ladies and gentlemen. If you gotta be replicated trillions of times in alternate universes in order to explain how these constants could occur, your choice. It's possible, but it's your choice. Most people, as I said before, have moved over to the so-called string multiverse. Now, the string multiverse, very different origins. It comes from string theory, and as I said last night, when you combine string theory, see, string theory permits higher dimensional space in M theory, which is an 11-dimensional configuration. And essentially, if you combine that with inflationary theory, it gives rise to a condition which could allow for what's called a collapse of a false vacuum in an inflationary condition where higher dimensional space will allow alternate universes like bubble universes to kind of burp out every now and again. Now, this could explain the constants in the same way, right? Remember, we're looking for a naturalistic explanation. We got to generate new universes, and the reason we have to generate new universes is because we have to have a new roll of the dice for the constants at those other universes, Big Bang, at those other universes, movement into an inflationary cycle. So you got to kind of generate these things again and again and again, and more universes to get more and more constants, or sets and chances at the constants. And this is a possibility. Except, of course, with the string multiverse, we see the same problems, except a few more. First, of course, is again, you can't visit the other universes. That's a problem. It's hard to call it physics. If you don't want to call it metaphysics, maybe call it naturalistic hyperextension into almost metaphysics. It can't be verified by observation, a direct observation. It's a problem. The second thing, of course, is that the string multiverse, has basically two big proponents with two major systems. One is called the Linde chaotic inflationary multiverse. And this was put together by a whole bunch of guys, not just, Andre Linde, but a whole variety of other fellows. And Leonard Susskind was involved in it as well. But essentially, what it's holding is that these bubble universes come out of the inflationary vacuum, collapse of the false inflationary vacuum. And once, of course, that happens, you've got a problem. And the problem in the first rendition of Linde's theory was that the bubbles were bouncing against each other. You can't have bubble universes bouncing against each other. You can't have bubble universes colliding. That's very bad for life forms. And furthermore, it disturbs everything. All of space-time is wiggling like a jello. And this, of course, makes schemes of recurrence in orderly environments next to impossible. So, they proposed a second inflationary theory called the slow roll. But the slow roll, in other words, in order to get the bubbles to get spaced out enough so that they wouldn't collide into each other at the time of their origin or later on in the multiverse's history, you had to put in a tremendous amount of program. And we call that meta-level fine-tuning. In other words, The multiverse has to be fine-tuned so that the bubbles don't crash into each other. Now you say, what's the problem with that? It may require just as much meta-level fine-tuning, if not more, to prevent the crash of the bubbles than the very phenomena that the bubble universes are supposed to explain by pure chance. That's a problem. Because all we did then was move the design component back one step. Now you got to explain the fine-tuning of the multiverse in order to get the multiverse not to destroy the bubble universes, so you can explain the constants by pure chance. Sort of with me? Almost. The same thing with the string theory landscape. The string theory landscape of Leonard Susskind is a very ingenious theory. But the problem with the string theory landscape is it only generates 10 to the 500 universes. And that's not enough. That's not even enough to get to first base. Explain the incredible improbabilities standing behind the constants of our universe. But there's a second problem. It too requires meta-level fine-tuning. Now, Susskind and others have made recourse to the anthropic principle, very mysterious principle, that somehow orders everything toward the best possible options that will lead not only to life forms, but intelligent life forms. Sounds like fine-tuning to me. Sounds like an incredible amount of programming to me. And indeed is admitted by Michael Dine and others who have criticized the theory as requiring as much fine-tuning as the very phenomenon they're trying to explain. What's the point? The last point, all string multiverse theories are subject to the BVG theorem. What does that mean? They all have to have a beginning. For those of you who were here last night, the BVG theorem indicates that there must be a beginning even of a multiverse. So just take a look at that for just these 5 steps for just 1 second, just so you can weigh the options. The string multiverse theory is not without problems. Number 1, you can't visit the universes. Number 2, it really does violate Occam's razor. Occam's razor is not a law of physics. It's just a canon of parsimony. It's a methodological way of proceeding. But it does have a ton of assumptions, and it has a ton of excess baggage in order to explain a single universe and its constants. Number 3, requires almost as much meta fine-tuning, if not more meta-level fine-tuning, than the actual phenomenon they're trying to explain. And number 4, you only get a limited number of items because they have a beginning. It didn't generate an infinite number of bubble universes, because if the multiverse must have a beginning according to the BVG theorem, then only a finite number were generated. And some multiverse theories, like the string theory landscape, have an intrinsic limit of 10 to the 500 built into them. What does that mean? You cannot prove deductively that God designed the universe. You can't prove that. You cannot prove deductively that fine-tuning is explicable only by supernatural intelligence. You're going to have to make a choice. Which is more reasonable and responsible to believe, right? Which is more reasonable and responsible to believe? Pure chance is not reasonable or responsible. Even Hawking admits that. So, is it a super-calculating super-intellect that defined the conditions, parameters, and values of constants of our universe at the Big Bang, so felicitously that it could support a life form, even though a life form in our universe is so highly, 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 highly improbable. Any kind of a life form is so highly improbable that it, practically speaking, cannot be imagined? Or were there a lot of bubble universes in a string multiverse, or lots and lots of Spitzers in quantum multiverses? What is more reasonable and responsible to believe at the end of the day? I go back to the triangle with which we started. And the triangle with which we started suggests that there was a beginning. And we saw yesterday what the implications of a beginning are, and how it suggested some kind of causative power outside of space and time, outside of our universe, outside of any multiverse. Now we take a look at two possibilities. If there was such a causative power, if the beginning really is probable from the evidence of entropy and space-time geometry proofs, if there really was such a causative power outside of space-time asymmetry, what seems reasonable? That it would simply cause a multiverse to allow extreme excess baggage to be developed so that the constants of our particular universe could arise by pure chance? Or alternatively, that it really is very, very smart. It's super intelligent, and it just simply does it. Let there be, bingo, the constant for the strong nuclear force. Well, it's up to you to decide what is more reasonable and responsible. But the evidence now, if we can sum it up, looks this way. It looks, first of all, as if there very likely was a beginning. If the space-time geometry proofs that have been adduced by Vilenkin and Borda and Guth are correct, if the entropy arguments have not been violated, if there is no reset of entropy, it seems as if a beginning cannot be avoided. And if it is the case that a beginning implies a creator, because a beginning in physics is a point at which the universe came into existence, prior to which it would have had to have been nothing, which means that it could not have brought itself from nothing to something, because from nothing only nothing comes, then it would seem that there is at least a degree of probability for a very, very powerful force transcending our universe that threw the entire universe and its constants into being in a single moment. And if that is the case, then it is certainly not unreasonable and irresponsible to believe that all of the fine-tuning and all of the improbability of those parameters was brought about by a single act of thought, remarkably super-calculating, super-intellectual thought that declared these constants into existence, whether in a multiverse or whether in our universe alone, in one single initial moment of the Big Bang. For me, it is reasonable and responsible, therefore, to believe that there was not only a very, very powerful force transcending our universe, it seems that it's really, really smart as well, highly intelligent, highly capable of designing every constant felicitously to dovetail, to give rise to a life form. Two quick thoughts. If this universe was derived with anthropic conditions, our students frequently ask, Well, is there alien life forms out there? Well, as I've said before, there's 10 to the 22 stars out there in 10 to the 11 galaxies. It wouldn't be out of the question that if we have an anthropic universe, and we do have an anthropic universe, one that can sustain a life form, one that can do remarkable things, one that has properties and laws and constants, parameters, and conditions just so to fit a life form. It is not impossible that one could have developed elsewhere. Is it possible that it could have gotten to a stage of high complexity? It's certainly possible it could have gotten to a stage of high complexity. Is it like human beings? I would have to tell you, I would say that if God gave them a soul, they would be like human beings. I do not believe that human beings are merely organic creatures. I mean, if you don't want to believe it from the, just the evidence of, say, a guy like Kurt Gödel, who claims that human intelligence is not replicable by regular algorithmic systems or is not replicable by any kind of a mechanical system composed of algorithmically finite structures, because, of course, you're algorithm violators. Every single day, you're resolving problems with algorithms you have not yet heard of. This is not done by mechanical systems, if Gödel is correct, and if the people who have reformulated his proof, like Roger Penrose, are correct. But if you don't like him, go to near-death experiences. Fine with me. There's all kinds of great data out there. In the Lancet, Britain's top medical journal, in the Journal of the American Medical Association's Diseases of Children section, all kinds of peer-reviewed longitudinal studies that show that there seems to be a considerable amount of evidence that your self-consciousness is going to survive your bodily death. And 20% of us do it in near-death experiences in ways that are veridical, that is to say, are verifiable by empirical conditions that can be witnessed by the so-called dead person. All kinds of great studies. I'll give a set of the bibliography to Margaret, and if you want it, just give her your website. The key thing, of course, is, what does that mean? Means to me, I think we have something like a soul. I think we have something that survives bodily death. I think we are non-algorithmic creative thinkers, a la Kurt Gödel or a Plato. I think we think about, frankly, think about perfect and unconditional truth and perfect and unconditional love, perfect and unconditional beauty and perfect and unconditional home or being, and perfect and unconditional justice or goodness. I think we think about it all the time. As Lonergan said, when animals run out of biological opportunities and dangers, you stop petting them, stop walking them, stop feeding them, stop threatening them. Do you know what they do? Even higher primates. They fall asleep. They fall asleep. But human beings do not slip out of cognition into rest. They think about what's not perfect with love, what's not perfect with fairness or justice. I gotta have the solution to this problem. They're thinking about truth. They're thinking about love. They're thinking about goodness. They're thinking about beauty. And I'm not beautiful, and everybody else is not beautiful enough. And I got to turn the stereo on louder to get more beauty. And human beings doing weird things animals don't do. And the interesting thing is, when you pile it all together, from Gödel to Plato, when you pile it all together, these near-death experiences, I must tell you, I do not think that human beings are reducible to a biophysical or a bioorganic or a organic physical process. I don't believe that. You are definitely partially that. But I think you've got survivable self-consciousness. And I think that survivable self-consciousness does what no mechanical systems can do. You transcend the algorithms out of which your thinking might have been habitualized. You creativity wonders you. What's the point? The point, it seems to me, is that the aliens might be like us. But for me, the only way they're going to really be like us is if they have non-algorithmic thinking. And if they can do that, they can come right to this very planet. But I know one other thing, at least in my view. God gave them a soul. Now that's a very non-scientific conclusion, but at least I think there's evidence upon which to rest it. So what's my point? If we should discover the intelligent alien, my point would be the intelligent alien should be assumed to have a transcendent and immortal soul that could survive their bodily death, that would enable them to have non-algorithmic thinking. And therefore, they're already probably at the point of going, we discovered the PVG theorem dozens of years ago. It's about time you caught up with the fact that our universe does need a beginning, and a beginning implies a creator. Well, what next? They already would believe in God, baptize them. Period. Well, no, I'm not kidding. Missionary activities to the planets. So I do think, I think alien life is certainly possible. I even think there's complex alien life is certainly possible. I do not think that human beings are reducible to mere organic or physical processes. And I stand in the good company of Plato and Gödel and thousands of studies of near-death experiences which seem to militate against that reduction. Last thing, evolution. When you talk about an anthropic universe, you're already talking about a universe that's fine-tuned, not just for life, but if it's got all that fine-tuning for life, it could also be fine-tuned toward what might be called intelligent life. Now, let's suppose that the universe itself has such fine-tuning. In other words, that it is already tending toward biological systems and so forth and so on. Could you have natural evolutionary processes that take place and allow for greater and greater complexification of schemes of recurrence? Yes, it could happen. But the conditions under which it can happen cannot be completely random. I do not believe that. I think there has to be certain elements of additional design, like compilers and computer programs. I don't think you can explain all the commands in a computer program by merely assembly language. You're going to need some compiler with some organizing function, C, Fortran, whatever, in order to do it. The point I'm trying to make is simply this. I do think evolution is possible so long as the conditions necessary to move through certain kinds of parameters are already designed in the universe itself. So what does that mean? If I may be so bold as to suggest that there really is a super calculating super intellect out there that created everything, I really have no problem with him creating, as it were, with that creator creating all the parameters necessary for natural evolutionary processes to take place. He either does it at the beginning, he can do it during the process, but if the conditions are met, then you can have a natural evolutionary process. What do Catholics believe about this, about Catholic intellectual tradition? There is another encyclical that came out. An encyclical is like a papal letter, and it's called Humani Generis. And basically, what we are allowed to believe is Pope Pius XII back in 1952, was it? Around 1952 anyway, around the Korean War. In 1952, he basically said Catholics can just about believe, in evolution to the extent that they wish, so long as they did not reduce the human being to a mere physical or organic organism. In short, not to reduce away the soul of human beings. And for all intents and purposes then, there's a great deal of latitude there. And the great deal of latitude arises out of the former encyclical I talked about last night, Divino Afflante Spiritu. That was the encyclical in which the Pope said, let science be science and let the Bible do theology. Please don't force the biblical writers to be scientists. Don't do it. The latitude for the Humani Generis encyclical comes out of that, and that has pretty much been the view of the Church since 1952. I do want to put in one caveat, and that is the caveat that there is an awful lot of design that occurs between all kinds of levels of complexity. To talk about all these levels of complexity arising by pure chance and then continuing to maintain themselves by pure chance is a very, very difficult leap for me personally to believe. I can't base an entire metaphysics on it, but what I can say is this. I do believe that there is special design parameters for chemical systems above biological systems. I also think that there are special design parameters like compilers for biological schemes of recurrence and biological systems that go beyond the systems of chemistry. I do think that there are design parameters for sensitive psychology. In other words, beings that have consciousness and sensorial development and sensorial awareness and desires that they can respond to that are not in the laws of biology or in the laws of chemistry and the systems of biology and chemistry. Those design parameters, in turn, one has to explain. If they were in the universe from the very beginning, then those design parameters, I would submit, are another set that you could just add to the 5 I gave tonight, right? You could just, there's another 30 I didn't give you tonight for just the universe itself. Then you can turn around and take a look at all the design parameters to get to higher and higher levels of schemes of recurrence and higher levels of complexity. And at the end of the day, it would be very, very surprising to me if the universe were not designed by a super calculating, super intellect. Not just surprising, stultifying if it were not. The number of universes you would have to generate in any multiverse hypothesis would literally be going off the charts to cosmic extremes. Thank you very, very much.
Sure. Yeah. We have time for questions. Over here.
Reading the title of your presentation the last 2 nights, proving the existence of God, and is that, am I stating it correctly?
Well, actually, it should have been the evidence for a beginning and a tale of two metaphysics, but was there something?
No. Was there
a title saying proving the existence of God? No, I don't think so.
That's the title.
It's the title of the book. Yeah, in the book there's philosophical proofs, but I don't talk about physics proofs in the same way. There is a proof from the BVG theorem for the beginning of any universe or multiverse, but I don't talk about proofs for the existence of God in the same way.
I just thought it would be clever that would be your title to drag us all in here and explore the idea that God came out of something.
That God what?
God came out of something.
God came,
God exists, you know,
Yeah.
if somebody says, do you believe God exists? I say, no, I don't believe he exists. He is. And they get pretty upset.
oh, okay. Well,
So I just thought you had done a very clever thing.
oh, okay. Well, I wasn't that clever, I'm sorry to say. So, good. Any question?
Back there, back row.
Couple things. I have heard that there is what they call, and I don't know if this is true, there's two things. Destruction of matter and destruction of energy, meaning that it doesn't just go on and on and on, because we have measured actually where energy, it just, some of it disappears, or the matter. So it's like, you just converting matter to energy, you know, out of one thing. But what you actually have is a net loss. So I don't know if there's anything, I've heard what's going on in physics, there's some discoveries.
To my knowledge, there is no violation of the first law of thermodynamics up to now that has any kind of vertical strength at all. In other words, that matter is actually destroyed or going out of existence, nor is it being created and coming into existence. What you have, of course, are changes in state. You could have, for example, a field, a quantum field, that could spontaneously burp out a particle pair, you know, and that would be a different form of energy. And then, of course, it could go back. When you have matter, antimatter annihilation, though, it's not like annihilation meaning it goes into nothingness. Again, it changes its state, right? It becomes almost like CMB, you know, cosmic microwave background radiation. You know, it's a pretty stark thing. You can have other kinds of things which may look like a destruction. Entropy sometimes seems like a destruction, but what it is the progressive disorganization of energetic systems. So I have not heard of any verified violation of the first law of thermodynamics. And by the way, if such a thing happened, it'd be on the front page. I mean, this be a big schmozzle, because, honestly, because it's, you know, the first law and second law of thermodynamics are very, 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 you know, foundational assumptions of physics and chemistry.
There's another question in the very back.
Oh, yeah.
Do you consider what has happened essentially in the last 20 years of physics to really give credence to what was articulated by Thomas Aquinas, that not give the reason in the sense, but more the religious tradition and science being actually incapable of completely.
Thomas clearly believed that. I mean, he believed that as his first and primary hermeneutical assumption, to be honest. And he said, yeah, reason and faith can't come into contradiction with one another. They came from the same source. No, so he goes from God backwards, but, you know, essentially he believes hermeneutically that there's no possibility of a disagreement. So, I mean, he was in favor of exploring every single question, every single aspect of physics, etc. Yeah. But yeah, I would say at the end of the day, that is kind of the fullest extreme, you know, in terms of hermeneutics, and I totally concur with it myself. But of course, you can't prove that, because you actually have to beg the question about God to prove it. But you can prove God, philosophically.
Right here in the front.
Prior to this evening, I would have thought, if asked the question, that the sun that's at the center of our solar system, not the sun we're talking about, would not be a good candidate as an example for a low entropy system. As I listened to you this evening, I reconsidered that. And I wonder what your reaction is that the sun, which is the center of our solar system, is a nice daily example of a low entropy.
It is. It's a very nice, complex, organized system which has all of the right variables in place to continue a slow fusion reaction, you know, and the parameters, you know, are just so perfect, right? As we just, right between blue giants and red dwarfs at all times, right? All the constants are just so that you don't have a super explosion or a set of super explosions or a complete die away. It's just right, like Goldilocks. I mean, it's just unbelievable. And so, how is that possible? It has to be very highly fine-tuned, low entropy system, yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Colin? Oh, Bob.
Hey, Con, I have a clarifying question from last night. With the allusion to the multiverse, I understood what you were talking about as far as having a continually expanding and contracting oscillating universe that just kind of blows up and comes back and explodes.
Yeah.
How does it though that in their equations that the universe is kind of what was that process again?
Or the collapse of the False vacuum in an inflationary condition. It was in, a Scientific American had a very good article on it by Andre Lind, the guy who first put it together, way back in 1990, 1991, right in there. But essentially what he really thinks occurred, you see, in an inflationary condition, basically Lind made up scalar fields, right? We don't know if scalar fields really exist, but it is a convenient way, if scalar fields did exist, it's a convenient way to basically use the collapse of the false vacuum in the inflationary condition to burp out a multiverse. The scalar fields can have arbitrary values and conditions. So, of course, that's what enables them to be able to have restarts of the constants. But if you want a nice little article on it, which is cited in here in chapter 1, it's Andre Lind's little Scientific American article, which explains it. But by the way, scalar fields, for all I know, they're real or maybe they're just woo-woo. We just don't know. I mean, there's not, again, a scintilla of evidence for it. So, by the way, I know there's a lot of talk about string multiverses, and I know there's a lot of talk about 11-dimensional string theory, and I know Stephen Hawking has declared that he believes that this is, in fact, the total explanation of the universe. But right now, we don't have any evidence, really, of even string theory. It is the best mathematical composite model that we have to explain quantum cosmology. That is to say, the linking of the gravitational force with the other three forces. But loop quantum gravity, as I said last night, is a very big competitor. And if loop quantum gravity is shown to have some kind of veracity, which extends the general theory backward so that when the universe is less than 10 to the minus 33 centimeters, and string theory goes out the window, it shouldn't come as a huge shock to everyone because there hasn't been any verifiable evidence of the theory heretofore. So that's where the problem is. So to make, a long story short, you can read about that theory in the Lind volume. And the Susskind theory, I've got all the Susskind articles. They're quoted in here as well. And if you take a look, you want a little primer on string theory and inflationary cosmology, just take a look at the postscript done by Bruce Gordon right after chapter 2. There's a little, it's called an intermezzo for strings. And basically it's a little primer on string theory and how you produce the collapse of the false vacuum in the inflationary condition through the string cosmology in higher dimensional space. And gives you a little primer.
Just right here.
That's a segue to the question that I had debated whether to ask Pete. I think I understand sort of the qualifications that you described for the multiverse. But I did not understand why necessarily the burped out universes would have to collide. Are you suggesting that they occupy the same time-space continuum, or are they different dimensions?
Yeah, they have to burp out at specific places. And so the trouble with the specific places is, universes are big. And so even in their early stages, you can't have, these specific places generating universes too quickly or even on the same trajectory, because whatever is holding the universe, the multiverse together, right? If it has any structure like a gravitational coordinate system that holds the bubble universes together, then of course one universe is going to affect another universe in proximity to it, right? Just like, for example, if you have a black hole here and you have a star that's kind of gravitating towards it, right? Obviously, that star's in trouble because it's going to get sucked into that collapsed coordinate system around the black hole. And of course, it will just go down into its center. So what you have to do is not only keep them from colliding, but keep them far away from each other so that the coordinate structure that links them together doesn't completely collapse in upon itself and fuse the bubble universes. And that does require a lot of meta-level fine-tuning. There's a nice little article that's cited in here by Al Benini and Leitcha. And it's right in the footnote there in chapter 2, and just take a look at that. It's actually a pretty good little article, and it gives you what the parameters of the meta-level fine-tuning are in the slow roll view of the chaotic string multiverse.
Did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, just a follow-up question. So you're saying that the sequential universes would cohabitate in the same 4 dimensions?
Yeah, remember, a multiverse is like a fancy name for a universe with bubble universes. It is still a cohesive system. So, right, so you basically have something, right, that's pulling these things together because they are emerging out of the collapse of the same false vacuum. So they are unified in some sense together, and therefore they have effects upon one another in whatever field of unification they're in. Yes, so the answer is yes, they are linked together, the bubble universes. Although they're autonomous, right? They're autonomous, but they're still in the same system. So they got their own autonomous set of constants inside, but they're still unified through a grand system called the multiverse.
Question back here.
If there was a beginning, or since there is a beginning, and God existed before that beginning, will exist after, and God is an intelligent creator, it would seem that the beginning didn't just happen. So therefore, like it has a purpose.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
What would that purpose be? I mean, I guess it's satisfactory just to know that there is a purpose.
Yeah. Well, in the documentary, Owen Gingerich, the guy from Harvard, came out and he just said, I am psychologically incapable of viewing this universe without a purpose. And so I prefer to call it God's universe. That's how he kind of says it. And you're kind of saying, yeah, if God did create it because it had a beginning, and if it was intelligently done, then surely God would have had to have had a purpose, and the universe itself has a purpose. So it's right for us now to take off the science hat and put on the theology hat and just say, well, what purpose could that be? In my view, it's love. I think God just almost by nature emanates, as it were, little lovers, if I can put it that way, out of creation that is objective, is to create a universal system, not just in which intelligent life can inhere, but to really create loving life, freely loving, morally choosing life in God's own image. And in my view of things, the way I see purpose and design in the universe, I think God definitely wanted not just intelligent creatures, but free creatures like ourselves. And that means loving creatures in his own image, because he knew ultimately that in love is our true meaning and joy in life. And I think that's why he did it. And if you say, well, gosh, did he have to get so extravagant about it? I mean, couldn't he have done it in less than 10 to the 80 baryons in 13.7 billion years? I mean, couldn't he have had, I mean, to God, right? I mean, time is not how we view time at all, you know. 1,000 years are as like a single day, come and gone, you know. But I mean, what's the point? The point at the end of the day is that God can be as extravagant as he wants. And for all intents and purposes, it just gives us that much more mystery to contemplate on in all of the intelligence and love which he has allowed us to have. There's kind of a nifty little quote from Sir Arthur Eddington that kind of puts it all together. It's in the nature of the physical world. And he says, there are domains of the human spirit untrammeled by the laws of physics, in the things of art, in the things of beauty, in the things of the spirit, in the things of mystery. Even science cannot challenge that warrant, because science itself and its creativity depends upon those very traits of spirit. Yes, in the end, the light beckons ahead, and the spirit surging within our nature responds. What he meant by that, I think, in this book he called A Defense of Mysticism, a chapter called A Defense of Mysticism, which was situated right in the middle of this book that was just like 1,000 equations called The Nature of the Physical World. I mean, literally, what he means there is the same thing Gödel meant by your being non-algorithmic thinkers. It's the same thing that Plato meant by you've got these transcendentals in you. You don't fall asleep. You do other weird activities. The key thing, of course, is he's trying to say, yeah, God did make the universe in a way so that we could ultimately be, if I can use this word, ensouled. So that we could be ensouled not only with his intelligence or self-consciousness, but at the end of the day to reflect the very love which he gave us the choice to actuate in our lives. And so I'm glad he put all kinds of nifty things out there. Glad he made it mysterious. I'm glad he makes it puzzling and elegant and parsimonious. I'm glad that he makes it orderly enough so that we can all survive. I'm glad for the entire extravaganza. It just really is a comfort to know that God did not underestimate the intelligence or the love that we would have in viewing that universe. Other
Professor DeWolf.
That's a word I can follow. But, with respect to alien beings, I think there's kind of the notion that out there in some distant galaxy, there's sort of a parallel thing to human beings that might look different, but, you know, sort of the same general concept of an ensouled physical being.
I mean, God would have to do the ensouling.
But aren't there limitations from a Christian perspective that God became a man?
Mm-hmm.
And whatever other beings were out there, they would always be, second fiddle to human beings who occupy. No other being out there is. Unless you imagine that ours is simply one sort of parochial vision of some larger metaphysical thing for which incarnation is only a metaphor.
Yeah, the only way I could really, first I don't want to put a restriction onto Christianity, because Christianity really doesn't have said restriction. All Christianity says is God, the Son of God did become a man. No question about that. However, what does that mean relative to the other life forms, or would they be second fiddle? The only answer I could give you is, in order for me to answer that question, I'd have to read God's mind. I really don't know. the answer, and I couldn't possibly know the answer to that question. But all I would say is, would I try and give them the good news that they were made for love? Maybe they know it already. The good news that God is unconditional love, maybe they'd know it already. Would I try to baptize them? Yes, I would. I would. And that's it. You know, I can't preclude them from existing. I can't tell you what that means about second fiddle and third fiddle. I can't even tell you what was in God's mind when He actually put the anthropic constants into the universe. But I do know one thing. There's certainly a possibility that if God wanted to ensoul another creature, He could. And I just can't put a limit on Him. That's the darn trouble. No, just kidding. I didn't mean that.
I had a question, Dr. Spitzer. You mentioned about near-death experiences. And I worked as a hospice nurse, and I certainly encountered people who shared their stories. But I was disturbed here in recent years where there's been some scientists who have written books saying that the near-death experience only occurs in the brain. And I guess what would you say to people that describe near-death experiences as only occurring in the brain?
There's 3 really good articles you just have to read. The first is by Van Lommel, V-A-N-L-O-M-A-L. And he had a whole team of people. What Van Lommel did, he's the one that had the article in The Lancet. That's the #1 medical journal in Britain. It was a peer-reviewed article that took place over 1,300 cases over 11 years, 14 different hospitals in 12 countries. What Van Lommel and his team did from Holland initially was to try and rule out that parameter. And what he basically comes down to is he says, look, only 20% of the people have near-death experiences. The other 80%, we don't know why they didn't have them. Maybe, you know, there's some explanation in the physical world or in the God world. But we don't know. But one thing we do know is, if it was oxygen deprivation that produced the near-death experience, or the vision of the white light, or the vision of the other relatives that are living, or the ability to say, yeah, my dentures are underneath that machine. That's where the nurse put it when I was dead, and I saw it, etc., etc. Now, if it really was oxygen deprivation, what would you expect, says Van Lommel? Every single one of them should have had that experience, not 20%. If it was the morphine or any kind of a drug or any kind of an organic compound, we would expect that if it's just located in the brain, 100% would have had it. And he went through and he very, very calculatedly put together control groups to precisely respond to this question step by step. There's another book by a guy named Chris Carter called Science and Near-Death Experiences. Read chapter 6. There is a woman researcher there, and her name is going to escape me for a moment, but if you go to chapter 6, you will see she did a comprehensive study of about, I think it was 32 or so different studies of, peer-reviewed studies of near-death experiences, and did a similar control apparatus. Furthermore, you got a real problem. Blind people see in near-death experiences. This is really hard to explain organically when they have been blind from birth. And that's a problem. Van Lommel actually cites it. He says, you know, I had 4 people in my samples who were blind from birth, and they saw for the first time in their life after they were clinically dead. How do you do that? If it's merely organic, and the organic mechanism is not functional, let alone a developed visual lobe because it's atrophied for all those years of blindness. It's really interesting. So anyway, just take a look. Chris Carter, Science and Near-Death Experience, Van Lommel et al., and take a look at another one called, it's in the Journal of the American Medical Association's Diseases of Children by a guy named Kenneth Ring. And it's called Mindsight. And it says, the subtitle is near-death, vision in near-death experiences of blind people or something like that. Sure.
One more question. Well, maybe two. Okay.
Yeah.
I watched a child economy scientist 2 weeks ago
Uh-huh.
in college, 12 years old.
Do you mind speaking up just a little bit?
He's in college.
Yeah.
12 years old, very highly, adept at mathematical
Right.
theories.
Yeah.
And he said that one of his main goals in life was to disprove the Big Bang Theory.
Yeah.
I wonder, if there are many scientists, what are their goals in trying to disprove the Big Bang Theory? Is something like trying to disprove God?
Oh, no. First of all, how would you make the biggest possible name for yourself in the whole physics community? Why, you would try to disprove the most rigorously established cosmological theory that there is. Would a 12-year-old say this? Even a really, really smart one? Sure. When I was 12, I said, I'm going to be president. I said all the time, I can do this. I know he's a smart kid. He's got a lot to overcome. He really does. And I don't think a whole lot of physicists are cringing at the thought. I really don't. But thanks, Georgiana. It's good.
Question right here. Last question.
Sorry.
Right there in front.
One of the questions that I mentioned to you that I had had a chance to hear Susan Hawkins speak, and one of the things he mentioned just as an aside, through his computer-generated voice, he said, well, dimensions 7 through 11 may well be in the human body. And I thought, well, that's interesting. I wish you would talk more about that. Do you have anything to say about that? And then also, just with what you were saying about unconditional love and so forth, that reminds me of what I know about our human development. Our heart actually develops above our head. And as the central nervous system develops, it migrates towards the and we spend the rest of our life trying to bring that.
Well, I don't know what Stephen was getting at, I'll be honest. I know this much, though. In M theory, 7 through 11 are not just in human beings. They would have to be actually present in what's called this Planck era state of the universe prior to the Big Bang. So it just wouldn't be in human beings. Now, maybe Stephen was getting at something akin to what there are a lot of physicists, too, who think that somehow quantum theory and the human psyche and other kinds of things cannot be completely materialistically explained. And this gets into some quirky parts of quantum theory, but probably he's referring to something like that. I just don't know what he would mean by 7 through 11. It's not in the string theoretical component. It does, the 7th through 11th dimensions don't have to be in human beings. So I'm not sure what he was getting at, but maybe in Stephen's own way he was trying to say maybe human beings do have a spiritual component. Maybe that's what he was trying to say. I don't know. And yeah, with respect to the head and the heart, boy, yeah, it's nice to have a merging of that every once in a while because, if we keep it all in our head and we don't allow it to be expressed in some form of compassion or love at the end of the day, probably is going to lead to some form of destruction. It's love which orients our creativity and intellect so that we want to make the world a better place. It is our sense of love, our sense of duty, our sense of and desire to want to make a better condition for human beings and to spread the kingdom of God. If we don't have that sense of love, our intellects and creativity can be terribly destructive. And frankly, I can think of a lot of ways in which that could happen. And so I think what we have to pray for is that mind and love, mind and heart find a nexus in the very smartest, most creative people that we have. And that if it doesn't find a nexus, that we do everything that we can to bring that sense of love to them. Otherwise, I think it will be the seeds of our own destruction. Anyway, thanks for the question. And thanks, everybody. Good night.
Thank you for attending.